Jack Thompson had never expected life to take such a sudden turn. The loss of his wife had left a quiet ache in his chest, a hollowness that seemed to stretch wider with every passing day. The small house they had shared felt emptier than ever. He had spent years working on other people's ranches, dreaming quietly of a place of his own, but now the dream felt distant, almost impossible. That's when the letter arrived. It came on a crisp morning, carried by the local postman who had known Jack since he was a boy. The envelope was thick, and inside was a single piece of paper. Jack read it slowly, disbelief turning to curiosity. A distant relative, someone he had met only once as a child, had left him a ranch. A real ranch tucked away in the hills of Texas. The letter described the land, the old house, and even some of the barns that had once been full of life. According to the letter, the property had been abandoned for years, and now it was his. At first, Jack felt a mixture of excitement and fear. Owning a ranch was something he had dreamed about for decades, yet he also knew the reality would be hard. He was not a young man anymore. He had aches in his back from years of riding and long days in the sun, but still there was a spark inside him, a spark that told him this was the chance he had been waiting for. When Jack finally arrived at the ranch, the view stole his breath away. Rolling hills stretched as far as the eye could see, dotted with wildflowers that danced gently in the wind. A creek wound through the property, its water sparkling like silver under the sunlight. The old wooden barn stood proudly, though weathered by time and neglect. The house was modest, its paint peeling and roof sagging slightly, but there was a warmth to it, a feeling that this place had stories to tell. As Jack stepped inside, he was met with silence. The room smelled of dust and old wood. Cobwebs hung in corners, and the furniture, though sturdy, seemed to remember the people who had once lived here. Jack wandered through the house slowly, running his hands over the worn surfaces, imagining the laughter and voices that had filled these walls long ago. But as the day faded and shadows grew long, Jack began to notice things he hadn't expected. Soft noises came from outside, rustlings that did not belong to the wind. Sometimes he thought he heard whinnies, low growls, or the shuffle of hooves. At first he tried to ignore them, convincing himself that wild animals were likely nearby, attracted by the fields and water. But there was something different about these sounds, something that made him pause and listen more carefully. Jack started his work the next morning. The property was vast, and there were repairs to make. Fences needed fixing, overgrown paths had to be cleared, and the barns required attention if they were to be safe and usable. He worked from dawn until the sun dipped below the hills. His hands blistered but his heart full. There was a sense of purpose in each task, a feeling that he was slowly reclaiming not just the land but a part of himself. While repairing a section of the barn fence, Jack noticed footprints in the mud. They were not the prints of wild animals or stray dogs. These were different, more purposeful, as if something or someone had been moving carefully through the property. He followed the tracks, curious, and they led to an old feeding area. The ground was scattered with remnants of grain and hay, but much of it had been eaten recently. How was that possible? The ranch had been abandoned for years. Jack's curiosity grew. He began to check the barns more thoroughly, peering into stalls and corners that were mostly hidden by shadows. It seemed like someone or something was living there quietly, avoiding notice. There were small signs everywhere, half-empty water troughs, patches of disturbed hay, and faint scratches on the wooden walls. It was almost as if the ranch itself was alive with secrets, hiding its true residents from the world. Despite the unease, Jack could not help but feel intrigued. He had always loved animals, had worked with them his entire life, and now the idea of discovering who or what was living here filled him with a strange mix of excitement and nervousness. That night he decided to sleep lightly, keeping his ears open for any unusual sounds. As darkness fell, Jack settled into his small bedroom, the old wooden floor creaking under his weight. The wind whispered through the cracks in the windows, carrying with it faint noises from the barns. Then he heard it again, a soft shuffle followed by a low whinny. His heart raced. He grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside, the cool night air brushing against his face. The moon cast silver light across the paddocks, illuminating the overgrown grass and old wooden fences. Shapes moved in the shadows. At first, Jack thought they were deer or coyotes, but then he noticed the movements were deliberate, controlled, as if the animals were accustomed to moving quietly through the land. He shone his flashlight toward the largest barn and caught a glimpse of an eye reflecting the light. He froze, unsure of what he was seeing. More eyes appeared, peering from the darkness, and Jack realized with a sudden rush of astonishment that the ranch was not empty at all. The next few days were filled with careful exploration. Jack began to catalog what he found, though he still could not understand how so many animals could have survived unnoticed for so long. He discovered hidden pens behind the barns, some partially covered with brush, others cleverly tucked behind old storage sheds. The signs were clear. Someone had been caring for these animals in secret, though he could not yet figure out who, or perhaps they had been left to their own devices. Jack spoke to neighbors in town, trying to piece together the mystery. They offered bits of history. The previous owners had been known for keeping many animals, but the ranch had fallen into disuse after a series of unfortunate events. No one had seen anyone taking care of the animals for years. Some neighbors suggested the animals might have found ways to survive on their own, adapting to the land without human care. Jack was skeptical, but he knew he would soon find out the truth. Evenings became a mix of caution and fascination. Jack would sit by the window, listening to the sounds of life around him. Sometimes it was the soft nicker of a horse, other times the flutter of wings or the clucking of chickens hidden in the shadows. He felt a connection forming with the unseen residents of the ranch, a sense that they were waiting for him to notice them, to become part of their world. Then came the night that changed everything. Jack, unable to sleep, took a flashlight and decided to investigate the noises more directly. He crept along the worn paths, careful not to startle any potential inhabitants. The moonlight revealed movement among the barns and paddocks. Shadows shifted, and he caught glimpses of animals he had never expected. Horses of different sizes, goats, sheep, and even chickens that darted between the underbrush. He stopped, his breath caught in his throat. Jack realized then that the ranch was alive in a way he had never imagined. Over 200 animals living quietly, hidden from the world, had made this abandoned place their home. They had survived, adapted, and thrived without anyone noticing. A mixture of awe and responsibility settled in Jack's chest. He understood in that moment that the ranch was no longer just a place to heal. It was a place that needed him, and in turn would heal him as well. He returned to the house with a mind full of plans and a heart full of wonder. The night air was cool, the sounds of the animals a soothing chorus in the distance. Jack felt a renewed sense of purpose. The work ahead would be challenging, but he welcomed it. For the first time since his wife's passing, he felt a spark of hope and excitement. The ranch, with its hidden inhabitants, had chosen him as much as he had chosen it. Jack sat on the porch until the first light of dawn, watching the hills glow with gold and pink. The secret residents of the ranch had revealed themselves in whispers and shadows, and he knew that life, though unexpected, was beginning again. With cautious optimism, he made a silent promise to care for the animals, to restore the land, and to create a home where both he and the ranch could thrive. And so, as the sun rose over the abandoned property, Jack Thompson, the widowed cowboy, began the first chapter of a new life. Unaware of just how extraordinary his days were about to become, Jack Thompson woke early the next morning, the memory of the previous night's discovery still vivid in his mind. Over 200 animals were living quietly on his inherited ranch, hidden from the world. His heart pounded with a mix of excitement and responsibility. He had always loved animals, but now the reality of caring for so many creatures at once was beginning to sink in. The task was enormous, yet he felt ready to take it on. He began with the barns, moving slowly and carefully, not wanting to frighten any of the hidden residents. He shined his flashlight into the stalls and pens, and one by one, he began to identify the animals. Sturdy horses with glistening coats, goats with playful eyes, sheep that huddled together, and chickens that clucked softly as he approached. Even a few birds, small and colorful, peered at him curiously from their hiding spots. It was as if each of them had been waiting for him to arrive, the new caretaker who could finally give them the home they deserved. Jack quickly realized that feeding them would be the first challenge. The barn still had remnants of feed left behind by the previous owners, but it would not be enough to last long. He spent the morning surveying the land, gathering whatever he could find to provide a temporary meal for the animals. He filled the troughs with grain, scattered hay in the pens, and set water buckets in places where he could easily refill them. Watching the animals approach the food cautiously, then begin to eat, brought a wave of joy he had not felt in years. Though the work was exhausting, Jack felt alive. Each animal he cared for gave him a sense of connection he had been missing since his wife passed. The once silent ranch was now filled with soft sounds, the rustle of hooves on straw, the bleating of goats, the clucking of chickens. It was a symphony of life that made the early mornings and long days feel meaningful. Over the next few weeks, Jack devoted himself entirely to the ranch. He fixed fences, cleared overgrown paths, and repaired barns with the hope of creating a safer and more organized environment for the animals. As he worked, he learned more about each resident. One horse, older and gray, seemed stubborn at first, refusing to come close, but gradually it began to trust him. A playful goat followed him everywhere, nuzzling his hand and bringing small moments of laughter to his long days. Even the chickens seemed to recognize his presence, clucking softly as he passed. Jack's neighbors began to notice the changes at the ranch. Curious glances turned into friendly visits, and soon, people offered to help. Local farmers brought extra feed, tools, and even advice on how to manage such a large group of animals. Volunteers inspired by the story of the hidden residents came to lend a hand. Jack welcomed the support, though he insisted on taking the primary responsibility himself. This ranch, he decided, was his home, and caring for it and the animals was his personal mission. One day, while walking through a particularly overgrown field, Jack stumbled upon a small pond that had been hidden by tall grass and weeds. The water was clear, and he realized it could serve as a new watering spot for the animals. He spent the afternoon clearing paths to the pond and setting up a simple trough, creating a safe place where the animals could drink without having to crowd around the barns. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. As the months passed, the ranch began to transform. The once neglected barns were repaired and painted, fences strengthened, and the fields cleared of overgrowth. Jack built new pens to better organize the animals and even set up small shelters for the goats and sheep. Slowly, the land seemed to come alive with energy and vitality. What had once been a place of abandonment and silence was now a thriving sanctuary, full of life and movement. Jack found himself forming deep connections with the animals. Each one had its own personality, its own quirks and habits. The older gray horse, which he named Silver, reminded him of his late wife's favorite horse. Caring for Silver brought back fond memories and a sense of comfort. The playful goat, which he called Milo, became a constant companion, following him wherever he went. Even the smaller creatures, like the chickens and birds, seemed to respond to his presence, growing bolder as trust developed. Through the ranch, Jack also began to rebuild his own life. The pain of losing his wife did not vanish, but it softened with time. The animals offered companionship and a sense of purpose he had not felt since her passing. He no longer felt the emptiness that had haunted him. Instead, he experienced a quiet contentment. The ranch was no longer just land. It had become a place of healing, a home where he could belong again. Word of the ranch's hidden residents spread throughout the local community. Families and children came to visit, curious to see the animals that had been living there unnoticed for so long. Jack welcomed them, showing them how to care for the animals and teaching them about ranch life. The property, once abandoned, had become a place of learning, connection, and joy. Children laughed as they fed goats, petted horses, and watched chickens roam freely. Jack saw the wonder in their eyes and felt a deep sense of pride. One afternoon, as Jack walked through the pasture, he paused to watch the sunset. The sky glowed with shades of orange, pink, and gold, casting a warm light over the hills and fields. The animals grazed peacefully, their silhouettes framed by the fading sun. Jack felt a wave of gratitude. This ranch, inherited unexpectedly, had become far more than he had imagined. It was a place of life, laughter, and purpose. Despite all the work, Jack still found moments of quiet reflection. He would sit on the porch in the evenings, listening to the gentle sounds of the animals settling in for the night. The bleating of goats, the soft nickering of horses, and the rustle of wings created a peaceful melody. In these moments, he thought of his wife and felt her presence in the land they had once dreamed about together. Naming a few of the animals after her was a small tribute, a way of keeping her memory alive in this new chapter of his life. As the seasons changed, the ranch continued to flourish. Spring brought new life, with young animals exploring the fields for the first time. Jack marveled at their energy and curiosity, reminding him that life, even after loss, always finds a way to grow. He expanded his efforts, planting gardens and creating spaces where animals could roam safely. The once abandoned ranch had become a haven, not only for the animals, but for Jack himself and for anyone who came to visit. Jack's story began to inspire others. Local newspapers ran small articles about the widowed cowboy who had discovered a secret community of animals on his inherited ranch. People admired his dedication and the way he had transformed a neglected property into a thriving sanctuary. Volunteers continued to come, drawn by the idea of helping care for animals in need and experiencing the peaceful, restorative environment Jack had created. Through it all, Jack never lost sight of the journey that had brought him here. He remembered the sadness and loneliness he had felt after losing his wife, and he understood how important it was to embrace new opportunities and responsibilities. Caring for the ranch and its residents had given him purpose, companionship, and a renewed sense of hope. By the time another year had passed, the ranch was unrecognizable from the abandoned place he had first inherited. The barns gleamed in the sunlight, fences were strong and well-maintained, and animals roamed freely, happy and healthy. The land seemed to breathe again, alive with the sounds and movements of creatures that had once been hidden in silence. Jack often found himself standing on the hill, looking out over the fields and feeling a quiet pride. In those moments, he realized that this ranch had given him more than just a home. It had given him a chance to heal, to connect with the natural world, and to create a place where life thrived in harmony. The animals had found safety, he had found purpose, and the land itself had found a caretaker who loved it as much as it deserved. Jack knew that challenges would continue to come. Storms would threaten the fields. Animals would get sick and repairs would always be needed. But he was no longer afraid. The ranch had taught him resilience, patience, and the joy of giving. He had discovered that even after loss, life could bring unexpected surprises, hidden treasures, and new beginnings. And so, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jack Thompson stood on the porch of his restored ranch. Surrounded by the soft sounds of animals settling for the night, he felt a deep sense of peace and belonging. The ranch, once abandoned and forgotten, was now alive and full of promise. The hidden residents had not only survived, they had transformed Jack's life, and in return, he had given them a home filled with care, love, and hope. Jack smiled softly, knowing that this was just the beginning. Every day would bring new challenges, new joys, and new memories. But for the first time in a long time, he felt whole again. The widowed cowboy had inherited more than a ranch. He had inherited a life full of purpose, companionship, and the quiet, enduring magic of discovery.